Right? That's love. And I got this sense that while I would have told you that I loved my wife, I loved Tricia, I didn't in the right way. It was, my sense of love was upside down. Right? I was looking for satisfaction. It wasn't, and ultimately, a love of a human being, as we will find out, can't ultimately satisfy either. Another human being can never satisfy us, and if we try to be satisfied in the love of another human being, as we will find out, we will actually become less and less joyful. But I came to realize that there was a reason, right? There was a reason that motivated us. And the reason that motivated us was that we were looking for some experience to tell us that things were right. That experience that we were looking for, I call joy. Oftentimes, for our purposes, we can use joy and happiness as being the same thing. Okay? Joy and happiness, this is really the state that makes us feel satisfied. Well, there are two dangers that we experience, and we'll talk about why those dangers exist. But there are two dangers, even if you understand that. It's even more dangerous if you don't. But even if you understand that joy and happiness is what it is that motivates us, that we are trying to find that. The first danger is this. Joy is something that goes beyond our bodies. Joy is much more something that has its seat in the soul. Joy comes about from really living in accord with the way that we are called to live. But we're body, soul at one time. We're going to talk more about, we're going to have a whole session about this, about the human person. But the body and soul are one thing, right? There are not two separate things. They're not two things that are joined together. The body and the soul are one thing, that we have two aspects. Every place the body is, the soul is. Everything, there's a corollary for the soul and the body in every experience that we have. And that's true with joy. Joy is experienced body and soul, but its foundation, its seat, is more in the soul because it comes about through authentic love. And we'll talk next time about what authentic love is. Pleasure is the bodily corollary, and the seat of pleasure is mostly in the body, primarily in the body. But pleasure and joy can be confused for one another. Pleasure can often masquerade as joy, and oftentimes it does. And so I came to realize that oftentimes I was seeking after joy, but pursuing pleasure as my end. This can never satisfy. Pleasure is not bad, but pleasure has to be understood in its rightful place, its rightful order. It has to be subordinated to the ultimate good of the person. We're going to talk more and more of what the ultimate good of the person is as we go along. So joy and pleasure can be confused. And we have to be on guard about that. We have to be very much on guard about that, right? One experience, I suppose, that we experience with pleasure versus joy has a lot to do with relationships, actually. Right? Joy comes about from right-lived relationships, authentic relationships. But oftentimes when our relationships aren't working, we seek the cheaper, right? The cheaper version of joy in pleasure. And oftentimes we get that in food. We can get that in other people too. But once we get that pleasure disappears, right? And it's gone. You see, with the seat in the body, pleasure is finite. It's outside of us, right? Pleasure is something that really, to share it means to get less of it. And so we end up becoming more and more selfish when we pursue pleasure. Joy is something that's infinite. It wells up within us. Joy is something that has to be shared. And when it's shared, it's magnified. Joy is really the state of being resting in where we are to be. Joy tells us, yes, things are working rightly. This is the way things are supposed to be. Joy will last after the experience is over. This is how we do need to be aware of these two things. If the emotional experience is gone, right, once the event is gone, it probably is simply pleasure rather than joy. But there's another danger. There's one last danger that we have to be aware of as well. And this has to do with how we seek joy. How we seek joy. If we seek it wrongly, then the irony is that, or the paradox is that we destroy our capacity for achieving it. And this is perhaps the greatest mistake that we all make. We pursue it wrongly. And let me try to use a little bit of oftentimes if we use categories, right, of things to help us to make distinctions that can help us to understand why this is better. Let's look at these categories of means. Right? Means are the actions, the pathways we take to get to something. Right? The end is what it is that we are seeking, where the resting place. Right? How it is that we want to come about achieving something is the means. The end is what it is, the object we're trying to achieve. For every end, there is a fruit, a reward in a sense, something that comes about in addition to the end. Now, pursuing it rightly, pursuing joy rightly, let's look at it from this perspective. Joy is the fruit of an authentic relationship of love. And as we'll talk about more, love is really disinterested. That doesn't mean uninterested, but disinterested. It means that we really love the other. We want the good of the other for their own sake, regardless of what it does for us. Right? This is a selfless love. The other, if you will, the person, is an end. The person is the end. How do we treat that person as an end? By self-giving. Self-giving is the means to the end. This end is loving the person. The fruit of that is joy. This is what happens when we do it wrongly. Right? Even if we know it's joy that we want, if we see joy as that thing that we're pursuing as an end, what happens to the person? The person is reduced to a means. We start to use the other person simply to get the joy that we're pursuing. And in doing that, we destroy the capacity for the joy that it is we're looking for, because we can't ever treat somebody as an end. We only experience joy from authentic love. And we've turned this love into use. You see, in some ways, use is as much the opposite of love as hate is. But use is a little bit more insidious because oftentimes we don't realize it. These are the reasons. Pursuing pleasure, pursuing joy wrongly, turning things, right, my experience into the experience that I'm looking for into my end, is what caused me to not ask these ultimate questions, to be too captivated with the cares of the world. Well, this was only a starting point, and I will admit to you that the clarity of this becomes more and more great through time as I start to understand the entirety of the faith through time. You see, I come to recognize, I come to understand, and this is the reason really for the title of our program. The title of our program we are using is called Made for Communion. We are created for communion. And communion is a state of authentic love. Right? So the subtitle might be Love Alone Will Satisfy. Right? Love alone will satisfy. Why this is can only be satisfactorily answered, satisfactorily understood if we understand who God is, who we are, and what the church is. These help us to understand all of this. It helps us to understand the circumstances that we're in, why we are the way we are, why we are chasing after our tails, why it is that we think we know what's best for us, and our experiences show us we're almost always wrong. Because as we pursue the things that we think will make us happy, we become more miserable. And oftentimes, the younger we are, the less likely it is to be aware of our misery because there's always something new around the corner. Well, in our next segment, we will pick up again, understanding a little bit more about this, a little bit more understanding about who we are, what faith is, and what hope is, and what love is, how all of these come together from the perspective of understanding communion. So we're going to understand a little bit more about the human person next time before we actually start to talk a little bit more about who God is.